Welcome to Scoreboard, the podcast that explores how athletes both current and retired define success beyond the game. Each episode dives into the mindset, financial decisions and career choices that shape their personal scoreboard, whether they're still in the arena or transitioning to life after sport. From victories to challenges, we reveal how athletes take charge of their own paths and decide what truly matters on their scoreboard of life. I'm your host, Chris Titley, and welcome to Scoreboard.
Hi, it's Chris Titley here, and today's episode of Scoreboard, the podcast, I'm joined by James Begley, CEO and founder of Launched Group, an integrated sports and entertainment agency and former AFL player. Of course, James, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. It's an absolute pleasure to join you. I'm excited.
Now, we've had an epic morning of sport with Rory McIlroy. We've had a gather round in Adelaide from where you're from. How was your weekend, mate, with the gather round?
Look, very hectic. I have to say, we in Adelaide turn it on, and the whole CBD and Greater Adelaide area absolutely activates. So I went to 20 lunches, and we had plenty of drinking and plenty of socialising. So I did describe it to the team this morning that Adelaide this morning was a little bit like the day after a house party, and you're cleaning up the half-drunk bottles of beer and the ashtray, cleaning out the ashtray, and everyone's feeling a bit sore and sorry for themselves.
Mate, I was chatting to my neighbour yesterday about how you'd plan it coming from Bris, whether you'd go to the game on Friday night, then you go to a game in the wineries on Saturday, but whether you'd stay in the wineries and do a tour Sunday and skip the Sunday night game. Lots of different ways you can play it. How do you reckon, or how did you play it?
Look, we through work, we were actually activating a lot of it. So we were sort of CBD bound. And look, the allure of the regional game probably isn't quite as strong, seeing as we live here. But certainly a Norwood Oval game is a must-see. Just your proximity to the play, you're on top of it. It's just something you're never going to experience again. And then obviously the Barossa, the state government and the AFL have put in a huge amount of money to get the Barossa arena up and running, and it did look pretty spectacular. So I would have definitely loved to have got out there and had a glass of Shiraz and watched the game.
Mate, before we get on to Launch Group, I want to talk about your love of sport and particularly AFL. And obviously that translated into playing 60-odd games in the AFL. But where did that love of sport come from early on?
I'm not sure where the love of sport came from, to be honest. I certainly come from a family of academics, teachers, scientists, generally people that have got degrees. And so I'm certainly a black sheep in that I never really went to university. But I have very, very vivid memories early on in my life, maybe 4 or 5, of just loving to run, loving to play cricket, loving to play tennis. And so I think it's one of those innate, definite kind of genetic things for whatever reason that was in play for me really early on.
So you mentioned running, you mentioned cricket, you mentioned tennis, but you didn't mention footy. When did footy come about?
I was a late bloomer. Look, I hate to say it, footy was never a passion point of mine. I never played football until high school, mainly because Norwood Primary never had a football team, and so I didn't play, and only came across football when I was about 14 and played mainly because of peer pressure. I had a bunch of mates who played and I wanted to be involved, and I think what I did love early on was the physical nature of football, AFL. And AFL, more than any other sport at that point in time, had a very clear pathway. State teams, you had, your under 18 competition, you had the draft. And so the other sports, probably there was no real clear pathway at that point. It was either play for Australia, maybe Sheffield Shield. And so the options there weren't around to play professional sport. So football was something that came to me later on in my teens.
And then as you progressed towards playing AFL, when did you think about the fact that actually I'm a shot here?
Yeah, funnily enough, I was 15. I played for about a year and a half, and I was fortunate enough to make a state camp. And I looked around, and what I thought was terrible. And I wrote down on a bit of paper. It feels like we've contrived this question, Chris, but this is genuine. I wrote down on a bit of paper, I, James Begley, will do everything in my power to play AFL football. Signed J Begley, number 8, something 1995. So there was a very distinct moment where I thought, I'm just going to give myself every opportunity here. And even if I don't make it, so be it.
And did you also make up your own autograph at the time then?
Oh, yeah. Yep. It had J Begley and then your hashtag and 8. So I even gave myself my number as well as my autograph and dated it. And the funny part was that I actually gave myself an out because I didn't know how it would roll out. But I said, P.S. if I don't play AFL, I'll be an exceptionally good SANFL footballer, just in case.
Just in case. So you hedged your bets early. Plan B, right?
Yeah.
How good. And is that autograph still the same autograph?
No, it's hideous. No, I wouldn't show anyone. It's crap.
And then, mate, your first game. How did St Kilda come about?
St Kilda got drafted, and as an 18-year-old, my first game was probably a style of footy that not many of the youngsters would even consider now. It was Waverley. And so for all those younger people out there, Waverley was like, they used to call it Arctic Park. It was this big, cold stadium, probably built in the 50s or 60s. And, it was horrible. And we played North Melbourne. And I'll never forget running past Wayne Carey thinking that this guy was like some sort of, he was cut from the cloth of Zeus. He was huge and imposing, and we got beaten. But always nice to get the first one under the belt.
And then your journey through St Kilda, you sort of rose up into sort of the leadership ranks pretty early. How did you manage the expectations and the pressure of being so young and sort of taking a bit more of a senior role?
Well, look, my time, I probably learned a lot about myself at St Kilda, and it was a pretty patchy time in the end. Like we had a really great cohort of young draftees, of which I was a part of. Myself, Lenny Hayes, we had Nick Del Santo, Lee Montagna, Justin Kaczynski, Nick Rewald, Luke Ball, all came through in a 2 to 3 year period. And the club went through a massive rebuilding phase. So there was a lot of leadership and onus put on the younger guys, which was a blessing and a curse. I think looking back on it, I think if you're a really robust club, you don't ever get to that point in terms of the way you manage a list. And I think there probably was a bit too much pressure on everyone at a young stage. But then on the flip side, it gives you opportunity. And, I certainly went through 3 senior coaches in 4 years. So that's not an ideal scenario. But, that's what football and life is a little bit like. You can't predict the cards you're dealt. And I certainly went from dominating juniors, everything gets rolled out, to then injuries, form, different coaches coming in. And it really was a big welcome to the real world. And so, still have a lot of good friends, but I often think about some of those harder times at St Kilda.
Yeah, and then the 40-odd games over the couple of seasons, 3 seasons, 4 seasons there, and then moving back to South Australia. Talk about that move and I suppose the back to the roots.
Yeah, and it was a bit like that. I mean, there were some extenuating circumstances. I in the end made a bit of an emotional decision. My best mate was in that off season was killed in the Bali explosions, and rightly or wrongly, I just said, look, I'm jack of this. I wasn't enjoying my time at St Kilda in Melbourne, and I really was homesick and wanted to come home. And in the end, found a way back to the Crows and really enjoyed my second chapter at the Crows. And playing for a club that you support as a youngster is a pretty special feeling, especially because most of the guys were still there that I absolutely idolised. So that was a pretty special time. Yeah,
and that first run out in the Adelaide Oval, do you remember it clearly?
I do. It was, well, in fact, my first game wasn't.
Wasn't for a Crow, sorry. Yep.
But as a Crow, certainly. And again, it was, talk about stadiums. I mean, Footy Park was no better than Arctic Park. So there was a cold wind blowing to the western side of the oval, and the ball got bogged down, and I think it was a wet game, but loved it. Loved every minute of it, and even just putting on the Guernsey and knowing that my family was in the stadium and my friends. It was pretty surreal, I have to say.
And you kicked a couple of goals for Adelaide, 2, I believe. Is that right?
In the first game or overall? I kicked a couple early on. Overall, no, I think I kicked. Yes, yeah. Look, I don't know, 7 or 8 maybe. You've probably got the stats. But yeah, played sort of half-back, back pocket, bit of a wing. Back in the days where Craigie had the wingman really dropping back deep to support the back line, and then probably played some of my best footy in the back pocket. I went through an era, I think in a 5-week period, I played on Gary Ablett Jr., actually played on Cracker, who's passed away relatively recently. I played on Stephen Milne. I played on Jeff Farmer. And so I played on these really small forwards that were pretty lively and found a nice little niche back there, sort of being a tall but playing small. But generally got yelled at when I got too close to goals, which was a bit flattening.
And mate, we're coming up to actually probably in and around 20 years since you've left the game, getting to that transition of, I wouldn't say an early childhood dream to play AFL, but certainly through the system and playing 60-odd games, the time to leave, the time to go, what's next? Do you remember that phase?
Yeah, and it's a really, it is a really turbulent one in your mind. And I think, I was sort of 7 or 8 years in the system, and it goes pretty quickly. And so you kind of blink and think, wow, this thing that I had set myself for is potentially coming to an end. And, in the end, I think my body, I had 12 operations in sort of 7 years of football. And the benefit just wasn't there. And I'd get up every day and I was resenting the game. And so for me, I was probably of an opinion, 12 months out that I was done. And I did enjoy getting released from the army. And I do look at that because I think some talent, have 300 games, amazing career. And, I co-founded my business with Matthew Pavlich, and his experience of AFL was vastly different from mine. I found it the toll and the reward, sort of not there. So yeah, for me, it was about understanding what's the best next step. And I did that cliche thing that most footballers seem to do, which is to get a backpack and disappear for a year, run away from Australia, run away from Adelaide, run away from the game. But in the end, that was a really, really healthy wedge chapter for me, because it just brings into perspective, I guess, where football and the professional sport lives in the global scale. And it's, it isn't as big as you make it out to be.
And I'm not going to fast forward just yet to 20 years, but the relationship with AFL, can you talk about that from when you were 14 to that period of when you were backpacking? And I suppose even now, fast forward a little bit, where that relationship with footy has landed?
Great question. You're an absolute fan. I'll do anything to play the game. I die to get drafted. You get drafted, and that relationship with the game becomes, again, more cynical, becomes more about the politics. It's more about your body. You don't associate it with fandom. You are potentially associated with failure. Some good times, but a lot of football is painful physically and emotionally. And so certainly for me, I lost that fandom and passion. There are a lot of players that do play and they go on to play another 300 games of amateur footy and they just don't miss a beat. That wasn't me. I really did resent the game by the time I finished. And so the escapism and getting away was really about probably moving past that. But I landed back in Australia as a sort of mid to late 20-year-old and wanted to forget about the game because I ultimately felt like a failure in that moment. And I didn't like the fact that, I didn't go on and play 300 games or play in a premiership. And AFL is very hierarchical in terms of the most talented premiership winners, the 300, 200 gamers. So I didn't like football. I didn't want to engage. But funnily enough, the world always finds a way to bring you back to what you're trying to avoid. And I did end up working for the Fremantle Footy Club as General Manager of Leadership and Development for 4 years. So there you go. But I have to say, if I come full circle then, I've reestablished that fandom and reestablished that, passion and love of going to the footy through my son, who's now Flynn, who's now almost 10. And he's got the trading cards and he loves the Crows, he loves Tex. And so the past players have a box at the footy and they make it pretty easy to go and watch. And so now I probably feel I'm back into that, wanting the boys to win. I'm not too connected, so it's not a problem if they lose, but I do want to see them win.
And James, the 10 years old, they're just so into the data, they're so into the teams and the different trading cards. Did you pull out or have a trading card of yourself and say, this is Dad one day, and Flynn go, hold on, mate, no, that's not right?
Well, I do. I think there's about 3 cards floating around of St Kilda and the Crows. The most humbling thing is, though, and I'll try and explain to him, a winger back in the day would average, 14 or 15 touches, right? Like, it's get the ball, kick it long down the line. Most wingers and midfielders, they get minimum 22 touches. So he looks at all my stats and thinks they're crap. I keep saying it's more of a high disposal game now.
Did you also say that back at our day, there's a player that kicked 1,000 goals?
Yeah, and he loves all that. You're dead right. They just hang on the stats and even the fantasy points now, and there is certainly a new way in which the kids follow the game.
And Auskick's done it so well in terms of the development and grassroots. A full credit to the AFL in terms of investing in that grassroots, because participation rates, even here in Brisbane, I mean, this is prior to the Lions winning, is sort of gone up enormously, and outside of the Victorian states, I'd imagine also the same in SA. But your love for football, you did mention about Matthew Pavlich, the business you're in together. How did that begin, and how did that relationship with Matthew Pavlich unfold?
I've actually known Pav since I was about 13 or 14, simply through some of the state representative sides here in South Australia, and he's an Adelaide boy. And, look, we probably remain mates, but the sort of embedded our relationship when I was working at Fremantle. And, I had a bit of an idea many moons ago about sort of creating a marketplace. And, at the time marketplaces were hot, Uber was popping up, and Airbnb and Airtasker. And so I thought, well, what if we use sort of similar marketplace forces to open up this world of, commercial opportunity for football talent, and Pickstar was born. And so I went to Pav and said, look, I don't really have any cash. I don't really have a product yet, but I need some credibility. And at that time, he was president of the AFL Players Association. He was Fremantle captain, and he was well on the way to being a Hall of Famer. So I thought, well, I need him. If he's interested in the idea, then let's cut him in and let's find a way to work together. And that was a pretty exciting phase, 9-10 years ago when we had the idea, to where we are now. It's been an absolute roller coaster, but we're sort of dominating now. And so, Pav, for all his credit, I expected him to potentially just put his face to something and say good luck, but he's been in the trenches every day, every moment, ever since he committed. And to some degree, he attacks this startup world and the business that we're building probably in the same way that he built his football career.
And 10 years ago, there wasn't the word startup probably wasn't overly prominent in Australia. The VC funds were certainly established, but not well established, and the funding wasn't as easy back then. Can you talk about that era? We had no AI, we had no cloud, we just sort of had a little bit of social media, I suppose, but not as much as we do nowadays.
We'd been building the company for about 18 months and getting some good revenue traction, but like most startups, you're burning capital, and I'd got to a point where I had 60 grand on a couple of credit cards, and rang Pav and I said, look, we're a bit stuck. We need to get some money to fund the growth of the business. And to point to that immaturity that you talk about, he jumped on a plane. I think we had like a 3-page document, and we just hustled like Pav's extended network. And, we managed to raise, I think, about 350,000 pretty quickly back then. I don't think that we would make that happen in this day and age now, in terms of the way that VCs and angel investors look and what they need from a documentation standpoint. But I thought had a pretty strong case. And the startup scene was in its formation. It wasn't really a thing. You're an outlier in Adelaide if you were doing it. Definitely, there was a bit more happening in the eastern states. And we have ridden that wave of watching startups, engage with investors in a more mature way, and the investors themselves being more mature, through the different cycles, including the sort of 22 NFT crypto pop, and the inevitable sort of downturn in valuations and the ability to raise capital. On top of that, you came through COVID. So, we've had a pretty tumultuous time, in terms of the business, and probably safe to say every time we've come through a life and death situation, we've come out, probably a bit stronger.
And James, we're on a sporting podcast called Scoreboard. Can you want to talk about the business and how intertwined it is with the sporting ecosystem here in Australia?
Yeah, look, at the moment there's two main businesses in our portfolio. Launched has been established as an overarching company that's going to kind of hold the future vision and narrative, but Launch houses a company called Pickstar, which is where Pav and I started. We also have a company called W Sports and Media, which we acquired about 18 months ago. So at present, we've got a technology company in Pickstar, which secures commercial opportunities at scale. It also helps manage the workflow associated with commercial briefs, and we've got clients like the AFL and Cricket Australia and football and NRL clubs, and so that's going really well. And then we decided to roll in a more sort of analog talent business that actually represents talent. And so where we see the future of our business and the future of the industry going is actually more about solving the client's pain point. When I say client, it's the person with a purse. Talent now are going to underpin all future marketing, whether you're an influencer, whether you are playing for Cricket for Australia, or whether you're simply someone who creates great branded content. The future marketing and future sales of all companies will relate back to talent. The future of the industry then will be, how do you at scale manage this and show great return for those investments? Whether you're a Telstra investing millions and millions of dollars in the AFL, or you're a car yard that's doing some influencer marketing using some nano and micro influencers, it's about the way that you get a return on that spend. And we want to be a company that's exceptionally well positioned to be a player in that ecosystem.
And James, you touched on a couple of points there: the rise of social media, the impact that these players can build their personal brand. Some of these companies also getting involved with the organisations, and there's short bits of content. There's KO minis. A lot's changed in 10 years. How have you kept up with it all?
Oh, it's changed enormously. You touched on a few pain points that the ecosystem's experienced, and that's exactly it. Gone are the days where a brand might invest $200,000 to put a famous person on a billboard and have them attend a few events during the year and call them an ambassador, put them on a website. Now that 200 is probably divided into 80,000. It could be a macro ambassador where you create brand alignment. You've then maybe got 100,000 for some type of content distribution. And then you've got the balance of that, which could go into literally just creating some events. And so all of that means administration. All of that means effort. And at the moment, that 200 grand budget is just being sliced up in a lot of different ways. And that's just one thing that we're seeing. We're also seeing the rise of talent as themselves, as distribution channels. And so you're seeing influencers now become business owners, and rather than get paid for a comment, they'd rather create a skincare brand, and they will use their own distribution channels to not only distribute that skincare brand, but sell it, e-commerce. So they're becoming businesses themselves, just like you're seeing now famous sports people moving into the world of being great branded content people. And so the way that we see the evolution is this talent, which used to be quite separate, i.e. I'll go and get a cricketer or a footballer, or I'll go and get an influencer. Now there's a real blurring of those lines. And so when brands or leagues or teams pop up and go, well, who should we engage? How much should we spend with them? How much should we expect to get back for that? And then how do we execute on that? I guess that's where we fit in.
And James, the role of a professional sports person, an athlete, or some talent you talk of now, the ability for them to do deals and to do content takes them away from potentially having a net session, etc. Has the persona of a professional athlete changed and is changing in terms of, whilst they're at their peak, they obviously need to be peak training and peak, I suppose, traveling and doing all these things for their sport, but also there's some brands that go, actually, we want you while you peak.
Yeah. That tension, I think, was more prevalent, 5 or 6 years ago. But what we're finding is that the leagues and teams and the actual industries themselves have on-sold those style of activations themselves. So you see Channel 7 coming into the rooms, you see, Fox creating bespoke content, slapstick content with current day players. And so I think there's a more relaxed sense now, and that role of me as a creator, me as a marketer, and me as a sports person is actually a little bit more accepted at league level. So I think it's a bit easier now for the guys to kind of play that role. Having said that, on the scale of branded content and interesting content, generally speaking, sports people are pretty piss poor compared to the ones who do it for a living. And so when brands are weighing up what is more useful, do I just want genuinely great content, or do I want content from someone who has a big brand and a big following, knowing that the content may be a little bit more beige and vanilla because it's not their core craft? It's a trade-off sometimes that they do need to make. Where you get a Bailey Smith or, the person who is colourful and, Danger for Geelong, colourful and opinionated and their, charisma comes through on their content, then that's the perfect storm. But at present, there's not that many of them around.
No, that's a good point. I remember back in the day, the early Lions, Jason Ackermanis was a similar sort of type of character. Again, and even now to a point where these players have signature moves and they have, Charlie Cameron and his, things and whatnot, and Logan Morris and McDonald's, lots of different activations per se. I'm interested to know as well from a mental health point of view, how the game has shifted as an athlete now, and from your and Pav's point of view, what you're doing in regards to helping athletes through some tough times.
Yeah, it's a huge point. And in a weird way, I don't know whether mental health is worse or whether it's just more prevalent or more spoken about. Certainly, I love the fact that the individual characters are starting to be allowed to have more flair. I mean, if you look at the way that the Australian sporting landscape goes, it's typically a laggard to the Americans. And the way that we follow the Americans is it ends up being quite similar. You have had for a long period of time, though, that our culture of sport is, it's the tall poppy. Don't be bigger than the team. Don't be an individual. Don't do anything that's going to put undue pressure on you. I think that's changing. You look at Craig McRae and the way that he coaches, or you look at like Luke Beveridge and what he encourages in terms of being yourself. Like, there is much more self-expression now, and guys are far less cut down for being themselves. I guess the problem is those that then do that do then command more criticism and the online vitriol that's sent their way. And I certainly think that the mental health of a young talent is more precarious now than it's ever been, because there is that pervasive nature of social media. I mean, certainly in the way that we sort of coach and work with younger guys, I think there are about phases. And if you're a phase where you're establishing your career, I think you just stay away from it. If you feel fragile in your performance and you're not quite there yet, find ways to just focus on your football. But then once you're in that mid part of your career where you do warrant some brand ambassadorships or some sponsorships or some sort of standalone commercial, then you probably should be out there. I mean, we've got some cricketers, Australian cricketers, where we encourage them, unless you are out there posting online, you're just not going to get the brand deals that you used to get.
Yeah, wow.
So, no perfect answer with the mental health and well-being. I think, there's a lot of extreme commentary one way or another about it. And I'm not sure what the through line is, other than the guys now are certainly far better equipped to notice it, talk about it, support networks. And the fact that we've got guys taking weeks off for mental health, no one even bats an eyelid now. It's not about weakness. It's not about, toughness. It's just part and parcel of the way that sport is played now. I think that's probably a healthy thing.
And being in the industry of business and sport combined, you want to talk about the macro view that you have on sport in Australia and where you think it's at and why you're excited?
Yeah, there's a sort of a collision of macro forces at the moment, and that sounds very jargonistic, I know. I think what we're seeing is that there are some tailwinds blowing towards us from North America that point to a very strong sport and entertainment landscape, which means that there are businesses that are being consolidated. There's a lot of money in North America. There's a lot of money coming out of PIF and the Saudis. And so you're seeing very much a glut of money in the sport ecosystem. And what that actually means then is that people need to deploy that capital effectively. So if you look at what the biggest talent agencies in the US have done, CAA, Octagon, Wasserman, Endeavour, the way that they've all consolidated and taken on, about 1.25 billion of US money over the last 4 or 5 years each, they need to grow their businesses. They're not going to do that by just simply managing more talent. They do it by acquiring technology businesses. They do it by buying, Stella, which is a UK-based football, European soccer business. They do it because they look to Australia and Asia Pacific and go, what's cricket doing? How can we deploy money and strategically be well placed in Asia Pacific region? So what we're wanting to do is position Launched and position ourselves at the front edge of that consolidation and that money, because the way that we view this world is only going to increase over the next 3 years. There will be more and more money deployed into sport. And on top of that, you have CMOs, sponsorship executives, knowing that sport is probably the only live theatre that you are investing in that can't be leaked, it can't be contrived. It's the theatre of real life. It's got the most amazing stories. So you've got this pressure from the top. You've got sales and marketing people wanting to be involved in sport. And then you've got sport themselves trying to adapt and trying to take advantage and trying to level up. And when you see that sort of turbulence, there's just opportunity everywhere.
And sport is also a good democratizer as well. Like if you're a billionaire, you can't get a different version of the game. The game's the game, right? You watch the game, you might have a fancy suite, but the actual game's the same. So I think that from a point of wealth and a point of status, sport is forever, a bit like entertainment, forever, sometimes, equal, right?
I have seen the richest people in this country make very silly decisions and get a bit weak in the knees around sports stars. So it is funny how that sort of power equilibrium shifts the moment that sport's involved.
Now, James, on my podcast, I do a little thing called the Scoreboard moment, which is a moment in your life which I feel is either something that's very vivid, that has either changed a trajectory, or is very defined in something which is very close to you. What's your scoreboard moment?
The turning point is a really good one. For me, I think the thing that stands out most was I went to the movies in my last year of playing for the Crows, and I was really pretty down about where I was going to go, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And the turning point really was that I saw this incredible movie that's about Che Guevara and his journey through South America on a way to becoming a revolutionary. But the thing that stood out was just this terrain, this South American landscape, the culture, the people. And I'll never forget, it was the middle of July, and the next day I woke up and I sold my car. Even though I was still a listed player, I sold my car and I committed to myself that I was done. I was backpacking. And I think if I look at the trajectory that it put me on, is that I didn't get wrapped up in finishing the year and taking some silly job in and around a footy club or an assistant coach or doing something that I didn't love. And it gave me the space and the adventure to work through what my passions were. And by the time I came back a year later, I was fully resolved in the areas that I wanted to work and what I wanted to do with myself. So I think as a turning point, albeit it was just a movie, it probably had a disproportionate impact on my life.
Yeah, James, there's some songs and movies that trigger people, and there's the time and the place. I think that's a fabulous scoreboard moment. I'm also interested to know your favourite sporting moment of all time.
There's a moment where Cadell Evans it was one of the sort of preeminent stages leading to the time trial where he had a moment, and I can't remember whether it was Mont Ventoux or one of the big mountains, and he had to claw back some time, and the rest of the pack wasn't moving. And Cadell Evans basically drove the peloton up this hill on his shoulder and minimised his time deficit to Schleck. And watching it, it still gives me goosebumps. And to be that far down in the Tour de France in terms of like weeks down, the pressure on you, you're hurting. And then to see him just take the, bull by the horn and drive this peloton. And yeah, I almost get a bit tearful whenever I think about it or watch it.
Yeah, some of those moments do create that. I'm sure there was a lot of tears this morning from Rory McIlroy, who had who missed the putt on the 18th, but came back in the playoff. One of my favourite sporting moments is John Aloisi getting that goal. I remember watching that live to get the Socceroos into the World Cup, and subsequently a wonderful World Cup campaign in 2006. One final question for you, James. You're a parent now. You've got a 10-year-old, as you mentioned. You're a former AFL player. Parents can get a little bit narky sometimes on sidelines. They can push their kids a little bit too hard and sort of go, oh, come on, referee and umpire, etc. when the refs and umps are only 14, 15 years old. What's some advice that you can give to a parent out there now with their kids playing sport?
Well, I figure, and I understand the emotion, like you understand that feeling, but I cede any right to say anything the moment that I'm not involved. So I'm not a coach. If I'm not a boundary rider, if I'm not an umpire or whatever, it's kind of like put up or shut up. And if you're not involved and you're a parent, just shut up. Because honestly, like there is nothing more putrid than watching parents get over the top. And I thought it was a bit of a stereotype until I've been involved in some moments where you watch from afar and parents and coaches just go way too far. So, yeah, I just think it's a pretty horrible part of the world if that's the path you go now, but you just got to shut up.
And I agree 100%. And from your son's point of view about advice around playing sport and potentially to specialise or not to specialise, coming from a case of an example where you didn't even have AFL in the agenda till you're 14.
Well, if I'm really selfish, I'd be happy if he never played sport as a profession because it's such a tumultuous, heartache of a thing. And as a parent, I guess it's even worse because you're not in control. And look, I'm living that at the moment. My boy turned around. He's obsessed with soccer. So he's playing soccer this year. He's not playing footy. Plays cricket, does little outs. Like, for me, just go as far and as wide and play as much stuff. Maybe start to worry about it, when you're 14, 15 maybe. But, like, the pressure of elite sport and professional sport is so intense. Why start too early? Like, you're going to encounter it. Don't put that pressure on early. Just let them play.
James Begley, thank you so much for being on Scoreboard, the podcast today, to tell your story as a professional AFL player, but also that moment where you said, right, this is going a little bit downhill. What do I do? Taking a year off, reset the button, and congratulations on your success thus far with you and Pav and the business over the last 10 years. I wish you all the best and continue to look forward to showcasing your progress and looking forward to catching up.
Thanks, Chris. Loved it. Good luck.